Welcome everyone to the Learning to Birth webinar series, where we interview some of the world's most interesting and inspiring thought leaders on birth and pregnancy. Today we have with us Catherine Bell, author of the Birth Map, who's here to talk to us about claiming our birth territory. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. So Catherine Bell is a trained doula. She's a breastfeeding educator and counsellor and author. Her science degree majored in anthropology and biology, followed by an honours in morphology and masters in science communication. She is author of the Birth Map, and that's a book that teaches birthing parents how to boldly go where no birth plan has gone before. Those are some pretty bold claims there, Catherine.
That they are, yep.
What led you on the journey to motherhood and creating the Birth Map?
It actually, it took us about 3 years to achieve our first pregnancy. And in that time, I guess I built up an idea in my head that motherhood was some sort of magical place. And I felt once I did eventually achieve that pregnancy that there was going to be some sort of fanfare. There were no trumpets though. There was no, way, this is awesome. It was just like, right, okay, here's your referral for your first scan and off you go. And that was, yeah, a little bit of a, oh, is that it? And I thought, okay, fair enough. Millions of women have done this before me. Okay, I'm not special. Off we go. But as we progressed with that, at each point, it was like this need to know basis. Oh, Catherine, here's another referral. You need to get this test done now. Or today we're going to take a swab for this. We're like, oh, why? Oh, don't worry, it's just standard care. It's just, that's just what we do. Oh, okay, all right. Yeah. Then the day of the birth came and I was so excited. And thankfully, things progressed quite well. It was only a 5-hour birth for a first timer. That's pretty good. Yeah. But the moments after birth suddenly became out of my control. And there were things happening to us that I didn't realize were going to happen. And whilst it wasn't terrible, it got me thinking, gosh, there were so many things I should have asked that I just simply didn't know to ask. So the second time round, I had this magical thing called a birth plan, which basically said, we want a natural birth. There's anything necessary. Yeah, that worked well. But again, thankfully, we had a fairly straightforward birth. But it did get me thinking, we didn't have any wiggle room there. No. If things had have gone differently, there wasn't a discussion that had happened to know what to do. And it was around this time that I was invited to attend a friend's birth as her birth partner. Wow. And I discovered the term doula. Yeah. And at the time I thought, I'm a mum, I've had 2 babies, I've got this. And I thought, oh, it's so different supporting a birth. There's so much more. Right. And that's when I discovered this magical thing called a doula. And so I accidentally became a doula because I needed the knowledge. And in becoming, once you have that knowledge, you have to share it. You can't not try to help people with that kind of information. And her second birth that I attended was a very different experience to that first birth, where I thought that because I'm a mum, I knew enough. But in the second experience, I was a doula, and we had a really solid birth preparation behind it. I knew how the system worked. I knew the language to use, and we were able to navigate through that with a lot more confident communication, expression of what she needed, and acceptance of what had to happen in particular scenarios. And she had a much more positive experience and was roaring at the end. I'm like, oh, we're onto something here. Wow. And it was around that time that my brain started thinking of it in terms of a map rather than a plan.
Yeah.
And part of that came about because every time you use the word plan, people think, oh, here we go, someone with a fixed idea. They want things to be exactly as they expect. There's no wriggle room. And conversations were shutting down. But when I used the term map, people would go, oh, tell me more. This is really interesting. And a lot of midwives started having huge conversations with me, whereas using the word plan, those conversations would shut down very quickly. But map lets you know that there's different alternatives. There's perhaps a detour somewhere, and you understand that to move through that landscape, you need support. Who's going to support you? And they were like, oh, tell me more, tell me more. So I thought, oh, I'm onto something here. And I started talking to mums about it, and they said, oh, totally, I wish I'd known to ask this. So then I accidentally wrote a book, The Birth Map, boldly going where no birth plan has gone before, which you mentioned. And I still pinch myself and go, I actually wrote that. Because it
makes me think, when you talk about it, I'm sort of like, it's sort of like Lord of the Rings, like kind of epic adventure of birth, and we're off, you know, with the elves and everything through the mountains, and it makes me, I think it's beautiful, because whereas plan is linear, you've got point A, point B, map recognizes and honors that this is birth is a hero's journey or heroine's journey for pregnant and birthing women. Like, you know, it's a circle that we're journeying on, you know, so that we start off as the novice, and we go through our trials, and we come back, you know, we get given our gifts, and then we come back being able to give back to the world that thing that we went off in search of, you know, love, family, life, and all that sort of thing. So I think MAP is a very promising concept, and I'd love to hear more about, you know, the process of how you make one and how it's helping women.
The really key difference between the birth plan and the birth map is the preparation that goes into it.
Yeah.
Because you have to create the landscape and understand the landscape, and, you know, are you going to meet goblins along the way? Where are the elves and how to find them? You know, do I need a sword or an axe? So, you know, or is that just my wits that are coming into play? And for a lot of people, that first dive into looking at what that landscape looks like helps them realize that they've actually chosen the wrong care provider. So aligning your care provider right at the beginning of that journey will make a massive difference. So that process of looking at what your own goals are in terms of, am I after a natural birth, or do I know I'm going to be expecting a cesarean? Do I, you know, I want all the drugs right now, you know, I know that's going to be me. When you know what your own birth goals are going to be, you can choose the care provider that's going to support those decisions along the way and give you the information that you might need for that particular circumstance. So the conversations that become facilitated through the mapping process is that at each point it's about asking questions and knowing the questions to ask.
Yeah.
So the book doesn't give you any answers. It gives you the questions, because that was where the gap was. I could find all the answers I needed, but I didn't know the question. So like in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, we knew the answer to the ultimate question, but we didn't know what the question was. So I started putting down all the different questions that I and mums in my mum's group and other doulas had raised to go, oh gosh, you know, you should ask about this or find out about that. And the answer is going to depend on your own circumstances. So you might know you're a high risk, or you know you're a low risk. Are you an older mum, a younger mum? Have you got good support? Do you have access to good alternatives? How do you manage pain? What's your personality? Religious beliefs? All these things come into play to inform the decision that you make. So there's no one way. And that's something that in the book I was very clear about. There's no one way. We've got a map. There is a landscape to navigate through, and you get to choose the path. But you need to know how each element within that map, how each major landmark joins to the next one, and where the connections are.
Yeah.
So you can't, it's not a smorgasbord where you can go, oh, I like the sound of that, I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
The first choice you make will determine where the next opportunities are.
Yeah.
And that became really critical in talking to mums and helping them prepare as a doula. Once they realised that once you've made one particular choice, other options might no longer exist. So once you've accepted an epidural, the pathway looks very different to before that. And knowing that an epidural may lead to a forceps delivery is a really important piece of information for someone to go, oh, well, I've heard forceps deliveries can lead to greater injury. Yeah. So maybe that's not a choice I want to make too easily. Or, oh, I didn't realise that an epidural had the potential to have certain risks, but I know that in advance so I can prepare knowing that maybe they're not risks I'm prepared to take. Or you can go, I'm cool with that. I'm so cool with that. And it's an individual choice to make. But what tends to happen is the need to know. The first time a woman hears the risks associated with an epidural are in that moment that she's desperately asking for it. And she's made the decision, it doesn't matter how risky this is, she wants it now. Yeah. And the process of informed consent has to take place in that moment. Mm. The medical provider cannot give you that epidural until you've consented. Mm. So they have to go through their 5-minute spiel of informing you. Meanwhile, she's going, just do it already. I've decided. And so rational decisions go out the window because at that point, her focus is on the benefits of the epidural rather than the risks. So it's a great benefit to care providers to be involved in developing that map because it gives them the opportunity early on to say, these are things you need to be aware of. We're not facing these decisions right now, but you need to understand that an epidural has these risks, or even just going for the gas. How might your labour change once you start doing that? Or are you aware that in this hospital we don't allow you to get in the water if your amniotic fluids have already released? So knowing in advance what the hospital policies are that are going to restrict you, and knowing that a policy is not a law or a restriction, you can still insist or have a conversation where you go, no, I'm prepared to take those risks and own them. That's really all about conversation.
See, in my first birth was like 13 years ago, so kind of prehistoric times. But you know, birth plans were like woo. Then so I did a birth plan and took it to my obstetrician, and he just treated me like an idiot. And I think he actually tried to punish me after that through the actions he took, because it's very intimidating to someone who has decades worth of being the expert to suddenly say, oh no, I'm actually, you're not the expert here, I'm a co-creator of my birth. And I think it was very confronting, the whole plan idea. So I think MAP is a great idea. The other thing is that with a plan, it's it's not just linear, and things happen, like you've said, you might not want forceps, but then if you, like you've said, what if you agree to an epidural, then you've just increased the likelihood of forceps. And Dr. Michael Klein and I had a big discussion about forceps actually, and he's got lots of wisdom about that in his interview. So your way of doing it, I think, shows your care provider that you are making informed choices based on, how things can go. That's not just a list, like a dot list of expectations and demands, which I think, comes across when you've had a lifetime of being the expert, it comes across a little aggressively and like you're not being trusted. And whereas your way of doing it is like, no, I'm a co-creator of my birth. These are the processes. I understand the different pathways, and if A, then B, if D, then E. And I think that's a really great way to communicate that we're making intelligent decisions. So that is going to change the processes in hospitals and birthing wards, where it is just like, oh, she doesn't know what she needs or want, let's just give her this thing. And what informed consent, when someone is birthing, what is that? Because it's a bit like almost expecting someone who is high or a little bit drugged to be able to make an informed consent to something. You can't, it's not expected that you're when you're giving birth, you're in a different plane. Everything's very different. And so I think what you're doing is like completely magical. Have you had any responses back from the women who have done like maps as opposed to plans, and like what experiences they've had?
The women who are using the plans report to me that they felt really confident.
Yeah.
And that their partners felt really confident because they're involved in that process intimately throughout, and they understand that if this, then that. They know where they're at and how to support their partner quite confidently, and they can advocate and speak for her whilst referring to the map and reminding the care provider of the discussion that they had previously. So it works like an advanced care directive that's used in palliative care, where you forethink what scenarios where you might not want to talk. And when you're fully in the zone in labour, that's a really good time not to have to talk. So if your partner can speak for you and have a document that has legal weight that says, these are the informed decisions that we have discussed, and it's shared decision making, but the decision belongs to the woman. So the idea is that throughout the process, they've talked about different scenarios and what that might look like. So she's got the information she needs from the care provider. She knows what the hospital policies are, and she can say, that's either going to work for me or not. And if they have a decision that doesn't fit with hospital standard care, then they can make sure that they've pre-discussed what that's going to look like, have it agreed to, and they can show the care provider that they fully understand and that the informed refusal that they're making is something that can be supported and doesn't require an old switch at the end where they go, actually, we're not comfortable with this anymore. It's documented, so they're protected legally, which is what informed consent is all about. If things do go horribly wrong, then they've documented that we did absolutely everything to inform the customer, the consumer, the patient, whatever the scenario becomes. So likening it to an advanced care directive helps people see just how important that document and the process is in terms of helping both sides make a decision that they're comfortable with. So there's a trial happening in Queensland Health at the moment that's using a similar process but coming from a clinical viewpoint, so that clinicians can comfortably have those conversations with clients that are refusing standard care. But what the birth map does, and the process with the birth map, is that it gives the client the tools that they need to actually engage in that conversation, and it rebalances the power, because it's very difficult to engage in a conversation when you know that this person's got more education than me, they've got more experience than me, they know this hospital inside out. How can I communicate with that? Where do I find the information in order to start that conversation, and knowing the key questions to ask? And that's where that the BRAIN acronym that you've probably seen it. It's quite common: benefits, risks, alternatives, intuition, and nothing. So being able to ask those questions about a different procedure, it's also helping the care provider, because they actually need to do that as well, particularly the risks and the benefits aspect. But a lot of people don't realise they can actually ask, and what if I do nothing? What if I choose to wait a bit longer? What if I delay this decision for 5 minutes, for an hour, for 3 days? What does that look like? And that then gives you a lot more information to build the if this, then that process that goes into the map. And so by the time you hit about 36 weeks, ideally you've got yourself your navigatable map written down, and you can just sit back and relax and wait for birth to start, because you know what you're doing now.
Yeah.
So
I love this idea of the map, and how you're talking about, you know, the values and matching your values to your caregivers and hospitals, or, you know, birthing locations values, because you know, I think it puts the dynamic back from being like almost like a child and a paternal figure of the expert, back to saying that mums, you know, and families giving birth, we're actually customers, and customer is always right. And we do have customer is always right. We are customers of the birth and hospital system. And we do get to say what we want, because we get to shop. And I love that you're talking about values, because, you know, values, when women are saying what their values are, then, I mean, these hospitals are, in a sense, legacy systems, but they will need to respond, because they need to keep on, you know, receiving those customers and those clients in order to be functional. So if women are actually verbally active about, you know, what their values are, and are willing to say, no, thank you, I'm going to keep shopping, if they don't find a caregiver that suits them, then those caregivers want to remain profitable. They have to be sensitive to how women, you know, as a population are changing and what we're wanting. Yeah. So talk to me about being a good girl. Like, should we be a good girl when we go into caregiver? What sort of attitudes should we have?
yeah, so I think that we are trained from a very, very young age to do as we're told. Yeah. And when we go to see the GP, we sit in a waiting room, we wait to be called, and then we wait to be asked what the problem is. We wait to be told what we need to do. We are a patient and we are waiting. No. And that automatically puts us in a position of less power. There's a power imbalance there. You're a visitor in their space, and the psychology that goes with that is quite overwhelming, but very subconscious. We usually don't realise we're falling into that acquiescence zone. And Rhea Dempsey refers to it as a trance of acquiescence, which I think is so poetic and beautiful. But it's based on real psychology that has been tested in a study called the Milgram experiments, which happened. You've heard of that one?
No, this is the first time.
The Milgram experiments were incredibly unethical, happening at a time when ethics committees didn't exist. It was just after the Second World War, and they were trying to understand why the Holocaust happened, basically. How is it that people agreed to do these atrocious things? And so they were studying the psychology of that power imbalance. And the key things that were involved was that if you believe that the authority is taking responsibility and you can go into self-preservation, it's the things that you will agree to can be quite extreme, as long as you believe that the authority is taking responsibility. And when we cross that over into the childbirth climate, or the atmosphere that goes around childbirth, it's such a big thing to be experiencing that it can often be much easier to hand over that responsibility to the authority, because to take full responsibility can be so overwhelming, particularly when it's the first time and you've got no idea, and here's this person offering to say and do whatever you know, I will guide you through this. It can be very easy to fall into that trance of acquiescence which is the good girl mentality, to say, just do as you're told and it will be okay. The idea being that it becomes a matter of self-preservation. If I lay down and just take it, it'll be over quickly with hopefully less damage. So it's not about trying to get the best possible experience. It's about getting the least worst experience. So this training that goes around on the psychology that becomes involved is particularly prevalent in women, because we are trained from such a young age to make space for other people, to not upset other people, to accommodate other people. So when that power imbalance comes in, we just sort of go, you know what, I can't argue. I better just do what I'm told, because that will be the safest thing to do. And because this is a process where informed consent is required, that's actually not okay, because even though you're feeling you're handing over the responsibility and that the authority is taking that responsibility, as soon as you give informed consent, the responsibility is yours.
Yeah.
It has that legal weight. So it's a catch-22 when it comes to birth or any medical procedure. So it's really, really important that we don't take on the role of the good girl, because it's an illusion that the responsibility is with the authority. You are the authority of yourself, and you have every right to take control of your situation, but you actually have the responsibility. So we need to be able to give women the tools so that they can actually embrace that responsibility confidently, and with the kind of empowerment that says, this is actually equal power. You have no power over me. You get to the Goblin City and I will have my baby. Thank you very much. And so that this equalitizing that power is very much about information. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So when we even that out, you can actually have those conversations, and you're not taking power away from the authority. You're just evening it out. In fact, the authority is also gaining power, because they are now more confident that they are providing the right service for that individual.
Absolutely.
And first, do no harm. So it's very, very important that they're making sure they meet an individual on their terms. So it's a win for everybody.
Yes. I think it does free the hospitals and caregivers up to know that, we're actually doing the right thing here, and so they can have a totally different attitude to how things are done. They don't have to be so paternal. So I guess you've talked about how we can take responsibility during our births, because really the buck stops with us, and I think that's really accurate, because whether we do it at birth or before birth or after birth, we quickly realize, you'll know this as a mum of four, like when you're a mum, buck stops with you. You've got no one else to turn to, no one else there to fix it all for you. Like you are the decision maker suddenly now, and responsible for all these other human beings. And it's a big wake up call. I think the process from being like a little girl to maybe having a relationship and not having necessarily the power in the relationship that maybe the other partner does, and then going through the birth care system, and again we're treated as the patient, the waiting person, and then the birth, and then suddenly, oh, I'm a mum and I have to make all the decisions now, and that's that. Okay, and we can still look around and go, help me, but it has to come from in here, in our hearts and our bodies, that knowingness of how to be with our babies and our children. So how does the birth map then free a woman up to experience like the role that instinct and her body has during birth? And like, what is that role of instinct and body?
Part of the process of preparing, so we covered the practical stuff, that if this, then that. And when we take out the fear of the unknown, she now can move into herself and slip very confidently into that zone, which if you've ever had a natural uninterrupted birth, that concept of the zone makes so much sense. When you completely disappear from the world, or is that, I can't recall who said it, but when we have our baby, we head off up to the stars and then come back. Do you know that one?
No, but I kind of like, hang on, what is it again?
We leave our body and we go up to the stars to collect the baby and come back. Something along those ideas.
That's so
And
pretty.
I'm sure one of the listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about, but it escapes me accurately right now. But this idea that we are going completely into ourselves, into our primitive brain, into our heart, into our womb, and we are completely with that baby when we feel secure that everything around us is taken care of. Our partner is guarding us from the saber-toothed tigers. The medical team knows how to care for us should that need arise. But they also, you know, the midwife knitting in the corner can be a really reassuring presence without having to interfere physically with the mum. So she can slip into herself and completely focus on what's happening with her and her baby. She can breathe and she can move as she needs to and start listening to what her body's telling her, which might be, in this moment you need to dance, in this moment you need to be still, in this moment get to the toilet and just sit there, and, or I'd like to have a bath. And she can then say the minimal number of words she needs to action other people to fill the bath or to support her, and people will be able to respond to her by trusting that with all the preparation that they've done, that she is acting the way she needs to act in that moment, and they just simply have to go with it rather than trying to shush her. If she needs to scream, then she screams, or if her scream gets too high, then someone will slowly hum with her and bring her down into the deepness that she needs to go back down again. And they just work together following her instinct as she moves through. And so the whole process is about helping the birth team to centre around the mother and to meet her on her terms and to trust that she knows what she's doing, and to acknowledge her as a powerful woman rather than a child or someone who is incapable of achieving this natural bodily function. And if we were to start treating how we defecate the same way we treat having birth, you would, you know, how many surgical removals of poo would we actually have to have? I mean, this idea that this natural bodily function requires interference in every instance. Whereas if we just allow someone the privacy to get on with it and to trust the process, it can be absolutely amazing to watch. As Anna May says, the woman who doesn't look like a goddess in labour isn't being treated right. Yeah. And when you see a woman who looks like a goddess, she shines. It is the most amazing thing to witness a woman in her full power in her labour. And when she comes out the other side, she carries that power into her mothering.
I know.
She feels confident. She can roar for that cub of hers and know that she's not acting in fear, but she's acting with power and understanding her own body and how it interacts with that baby. And the partner who observes that happening can often go, whoa, this woman is the most amazing thing on the earth. And the oxytocin that flows from the partner all helps the partner as well to come into parenting with that confidence. So hopefully the process of preparing for the birth cushions the parents for what's going to happen afterwards. And a key component of that preparation is going beyond the birth. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is have a gathering after they've finished doing the practical map. Have a gathering of people. Some people call it a blessing way or something like that, where it's not a baby shower that's focused on plastic things and onesies. It's a gathering of usually women, but not always, who come together to honour the woman the woman as she is and the woman she's about to become as a mother, and acknowledging the transition, because when she navigates through the birth, she is not the same person on the other side. And I love the term matrescence, because it describes a physiological thing that's happening to women that we just simply don't honour in today's society. And it can take a good 12 months for that process to complete. Her brain is rewiring, her body is reshaping itself. Every fibre of her being is becoming this new person. And there is a period of grief where she looks at the person before and who she is now, and being able to accept her new person requires support and acknowledgement and understanding. So having that as part of your preparations, because when you're in that moment, just as with adolescence, when you try to tell a teenager what's physically happening to them, and that you understand that their big emotions right now I'm not going to take them personally. You can't tell someone in the moment. It's very patronizing to do so. So understanding in advance can be very helpful to say, okay, I am experiencing big things, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I have support for that. And that might be something as simple as having people who can make you a meal to put in the freezer, and you can have a stockpile of meals. Because every time you eat something that someone else has made for you, you are reminded that you're part of a community, that you have people that you can call on, that you are not alone. There is a village, and for partners as well, particularly if they've had to go back to work very quickly after the birth, and knowing that if they can help step up by creating meals, making a sandwich for their partner and putting it in the fridge in the morning, because they know she's not going to eat properly unless it's there easy for her to do, something she can eat with one hand. Having a place set up where she can just totally focus on getting the breastfeeding happening, and understanding that that can take several months, and just breathe. Maybe I need a good book to read or a couple of videos to binge on while I have my Homer Simpson dent in the couch because I'm not going anywhere for a while, and making that okay, because it will pass, and what you're creating and doing for your baby in that moment is biologically normal, psychologically important for mother and baby, and that the partner is an integral part of that. They don't need to give the baby a bottle to experience bonding. They can bathe the baby or sit with the mother, make sure the mother is fed. There's so much a partner can do to be a part of that process. But it's the preparation beforehand that helps them put in place the systems to make that happen. So knowing that we need to stock the freezer, or that these are the people we can talk to, where the key people in their lives are if they need help. And they might not need to call on them every day, but it can be reassuring just knowing that you've got the scaffolding in place. Because again, with the good girl training that we also have the independence training, that you must be able to do things on your own. And here's your baby, go home, congratulations. And it'll all magically happen when you get home. And unfortunately, if the only support that you've got is someone who doesn't quite align with your goals, so perhaps you want to breastfeed, but the person who is your primary supporter didn't breastfeed or doesn't value breastfeeding, they're not going to be able to meet you on the terms that you need the support, because it's not something that's in their makeup. So knowing in advance that if breastfeeding is your goal, you can know who the key people are to bring into your space, whether it's the Australian Breastfeeding Helpline, something as simple as knowing that there's a consistent place to access information, reassurance, someone to talk to, particularly if if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, the ABA helpline is something that's available to you, and you know you're going to get consistent advice.
Yeah.
If you don't know that in advance.
The ABA helplines in Australia, the Australian Breastfeeding Association, so there's going to be different countries, hopefully, where you can connect with people in your own country who can help you. But what I love about what you're talking about in the birth map is that it's like, you know, it's like the birth is like a sunset or a sunrise. Let's say sunrise, a bit more positive than sunset. It's like a sunrise, you know, and you've got pregnancy, birth, and then that's the sunrise, and then, like, you know, everything that happens afterwards, because we get very focused. I found, like, you know, I was so focused in my first pregnancy, like on the birth. Birth was like almost the easy part, you know, because it was the stuff that happened afterwards, after the birth, even in the hospital, that was the real kind of muck up. And so the second time I went in again, I was like, this time I don't even need a birth plan. I'm just going to get the providers I want, do it my way. And I did it my way. But then again, after the birth, things sort of went a bit haywire. And luckily, it all went well in the end for me and baby. But it was like that afterbirth period that you're talking about. Like you're talking about like having a birth map. And I've seen the diagrams of it, you know, like, you know, the different ways you give birth then means different things happen after birth as well. And so you're still making those informed decisions after birth. And it seems like you're almost like getting women prepared about like their values about like around breastfeeding and everything too, and having everything in place to help with that. Yeah. Yep. So
no, there's no one way.
No. Luckily, with birth or with going to the toilet, you know, like, you know, it's just a bit, we all do it in our own way. So where we need to find out more about the birth map and getting support to make a birth map, like you've got a community of your own that people can join. Do you want to tell us about the community?
Yeah, so on my website, I created a member area, which is free to join, because I got really frustrated with Facebook. I found that I was pretty much constantly on a ban, because it turns out that empowering women is against community standards. I hope that has changed now, but when I left Facebook a few years ago, I was at the point where I had tried to create a group, but because I was on constant bans, I couldn't admin that group. And so the group was constantly vulnerable, and you couldn't be assured that there were going to be trolls in the group. Who were the people in the group? Is it genuine? And the information, is it consistent? Is it evidence-based? Is it kind? And I just found that there was a lot of trauma on Facebook, and it didn't feel safe. So I created this free member area on my website so that I could create a space that didn't have advertising, that wasn't mining your data or watching everything you did to make sure you knew which things you needed to buy. There's no advertising, because you don't really need to buy much stuff at all. And what you need is support and information. So I'd gathered quite a huge collection of information, but I also didn't want it freely available on the public where anyone could comment on it.
Yeah.
I wanted to create a space that I could protect and monitor a bit more closely. So it evolved from that idea that Facebook couldn't always be guaranteed as a safe place, and there was no security. If Facebook decided it was going to stop all groups or own all the information, suddenly you didn't have access to it. You'd have a wealth of knowledge there that couldn't be accessed anymore. So this way I can also control how that information is stored and used and keep it safe. So if women do want to share a story, it's safe and it's contained. And if she decides she wants to delete it and we never speak of it again, then it's gone. It's not out in the ether. So it's not a very active space in terms of conversations online. A lot of people use it to access the actual information, and we try to have local meetups. So I have an events. It's fairly sporadic, but we try to meet in the park because the face-to-face interactions become really important. But around the country, we've got there's positive birth groups. There's the breastfeeding association groups, Lamar, you know, whatever. There's hundreds of groups you can talk to that meet with you on your terms. So you'll find the group that best matches your philosophy. Where if you're a fit mum, there's heaps of active walking groups and exercise groups that mothers can join for that sort of thing. So it's about finding the group that speaks your language and is parenting in the way that makes sense to you. If you're a returning to work mum, that looks very different to a stay-at-home mum's experience. Your needs are going to be different. The days of the week that you can meet are going to be different. So the idea is mostly to help women find their real life group to connect with, because our interactions on Facebook in particular, I felt there is this illusion of connection that's actually happening. It's not a real heart-to-heart connection. You can't embrace somebody on Facebook in the same way that if you've got a friend in need, that you can take a meal over, make a cuppa for them and say, right, tell me what's happening for you. And oftentimes just voicing what you're feeling is enough. And if it's not enough, then hopefully using the information within the member area, you'll find out where you can seek the more professional help if that's needed, and that it's okay to ask. There's nothing wrong with getting to a point where you need to say, you know what, I'm not coping, or this isn't working for me. I need to find out another way of doing this, or I need another tactic. The information is there if you know where to find it. So the member group evolved to meet that gap that I was finding. There used to be lots of forums back in the ancient days when, yeah, but now so many people fall into the black hole of Facebook, which is 24/7, and they're sharing information that's not always consistent or accurate, and it can be very difficult. Particularly breastfeeding is probably the biggest example, where women will say, oh, this has worked for me, do it this way, and it can actually be really bad advice if it's not quite fitting with the questioner's needs. So often when we ask a question on Facebook, we're not giving the full context of our situation. So it's very difficult to get a full story back, which is where the seeking advice from a professional organisation such as the Breastfeeding Association, and there are different ones across different countries, where you get consistent information, or knowing places like there's the Milk Meg, for example, who does operate on Facebook, and she's a no-nonsense, straight down the line, this is how it is, and she's a lot of fun as well. So it can be a nice place to hang out if you find the right group. But if you end up in a fairly toxic group, you can end up in a very dark place. And we want to try and avoid slipping down into dark places and making motherhood a wonderful journey. So there's a difference between motherhood and mothering. So when we talk about motherhood, we're talking about the societal construct around mothering, which is where women often feel the pressure to have a home that's Instagram worthy, or children that are looking just so and behaving just so, and that they themselves are a yummy mummy that's you know, at any point in time she can take a selfie and it'll look just like what she sees on social media. So for very vulnerable women, this can be a really, really stressful and anxious experience for them when they think, oh, everyone else looks like they've got it together. It's all an illusion, unfortunately, but it can be a very dangerous illusion for vulnerable women. So hopefully with the preparation, you can be alert to that. And
Yes.
am I allowed to swear?
I swear all the time. Please go ahead. I mean, everyone swears during birth.
Indeed they do. I call it the bullshit filter. So it's about making sure that you've got a handle on what's quality information and what are your quality resources to access, and that includes different organisations to work out, is this breastfeeding helpline the one I should be contacting? Or, oh, hang on, it's sponsored by a formula company. Maybe it's not going to be the best choice if breastfeeding is my goal.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of evidence to show that the information that's given on a breastfeeding helpline that is operated by a formula company compared to one that's run by a volunteer-based breastfeeding organisation, the information is very different. And the goal of the formula company is to encourage you to supplement, because obviously their business is in formula. So it's something to be very aware of, to go, oh, hang on, before I call this number, who's operating this helpline? Or before I join this group, who is running it and what are their motivations? And there are paid trolls on Facebook. You can use your profile to make money, and there are companies that have paid mothers to promote a particular product within their mothers group. And the reason they do that is because when you're talking friend to friend about a product, you're more likely to see value in that.
Yeah.
If you can be clued up to some of the tricks of the trade and know how to see it, you can put your bullshit filter on and go a lot more confidently into that space, knowing that that you're perhaps not as vulnerable because you're a bit more aware. So knowledge is power. Yes. And vulnerability is not a bad thing, but it is not a secure thing for most women and their partners as well.
Sure.
Increasingly, we're seeing we're seeing partners who are also vulnerable to postnatal depression because they're not they've lost that sense of knowing what to do. So couples can find themselves in pretty horrid places simply because they don't know the conversations they need to be having or where to go to for help. And whilst both partners may be coming from a place of absolute love and care, you can end up in a place that's more despair and argumentative because no one knows quite where they're at or what to do, and they're stressed out. So we want to avoid people falling into that kind of holding pattern.
That's incredible. The thing to, that comes out in the discussions we've had as part of learning to birth is that just like you need to know yourself in birth, you need to know your caregivers and you need to know your support team because you want to make sure your values are all aligned and working together. And what you've said really hits home. It's the same with social media. I mean, or any of our presences online. Birth and pregnancy and new motherhood is a very vulnerable time. Our bodies are changing. Our bodies are going where no body's gone before, kind of thing. The things our bodies do, oh my God. And it's a very vulnerable time. And if, we can be as selective with our social media presence about, what groups we're in and what we say and what comments we allow. And we just, we have to be willing to go, I deserve better. No one gets to speak to me like that online or offline. Thank you. And having those boundaries, because again, once we hit motherhood, we have to have boundaries. It's incredible. It's a wonderful journey, a process we go through about, here we are talking about boundaries and maps and everything. It's incredible. Journeys, boundaries, maps, it's really that journey coming back in here and grounding and claiming our space, like claiming like this territory is my territory. And in this territory, the things I want to happen. It's my space. And you kind of talk about that on your website about, you have that driving analogy, like the navigator, like women are like we are choosing the destination when we birth, and then we have our support team who are there like helping us, oh, turn left there, turn right there, they're the little navigator map kind of helping us along, It's a great analogy.
Yeah, it works. And yeah, as in any good road trip, it's the woman who decides or the driver who decides what music we're listening to. So, the passengers are there to support her, and the medical team's in the back seat. And no one likes a backseat driver. So the idea is that they're there to support, and they'll change the tyres if they need to be changed. Everyone's got a role, but the woman is in the driver's seat, and it's incredibly important that we acknowledge that women are very capable of making decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
How does a woman who's ready now, like, yeah, I'm ready to build my map and power on over that, those bridges and mountains, how do they do that with you? Do they buy your book? Do they join your community? What's the process?
Yeah, they can get onto the email list if they like getting newsletters full of heaps and heaps of information, usually covering ethics and informed decisions and consent and how awesome women are. If they like getting newsletters, then once a month I send out a newsletter that probably takes them a whole month to get through. But I find stuff and I go, oh, this is awesome, I'm going to share this with the community. But I only send out an email once a month because everybody's inboxes are already really full. So I try to keep it as concise as I can. But hey, the world is full of awesome stuff. I must share it. And but the book itself is designed to be a self-guided journey. So it's got the first chapter covers what an informed decision is, where you might need to make an informed decision and how you might go about that. Yeah. And the second chapter goes through all the questions that you can consider for different areas. And some people might go, oh, no, that doesn't bother me, and they'll skip over a section. Or they might get to another bit and go, whoa, didn't even think about that. That's actually a really important detail that I want to make sure that I've got that aspect set up. So it depends on whether you've birthed before. You're going to look at those questions differently, and you'll build your own map, and it goes through how you might present that map and what the document itself might look like. And there's heaps of white space, so you can write down more questions, write down the answers you come across, because when you go to your antenatal appointments, you'll often forget what it was you're going to ask, and then as soon as the appointment's over, you'll go, oh, I was supposed to ask that. So it gives you an opportunity to write down all the things you want to ask, and then write the responses into the same space, and you won't lose it. There's no little bits of paper hanging around. And the last chapter goes through the beyond the birth.
It sounds like an essential item. Any woman who's,
It's the book I wish I had. It's what and I actually, as all good scientists do, I tested it on myself before I released it to the public. And my midwife, the first time I went through the contingency planning, the midwife was like, Catherine, none of these horrible things are going to happen to you, and we've got your back, it'll be okay. And I said, I don't doubt that for a second, but I need to document these what ifs so that my husband's got the what to do in the event that they happen. So my worst case scenario was I was having a cesarean under general anaesthetic, and I was in a coma for weeks afterwards. It was an incredibly dramatic scenario. And she's like, oh, Catherine, that's like such an incredibly rare scenario. I said, yep, but the baby's in the NICU. I'm unable to be with the baby. What does that look like? What are the hospital policies? And what tools are at my husband's service? What would happen in that scenario? And because breastfeeding was important to me, one of the aspects of that scenario was I don't want my baby to have formula. So in my birth map, I was giving permission for them to pump my own milk from me to give to my baby in the event that I was not able to do that. So by giving pre-consent for that scenario, I was empowering my husband and the care provider to have an option that they otherwise wouldn't have. When I shared that in a mother's group that happened to be on Facebook, I had a mum say, "I would be mortified if anybody did that to me. I'm going to write in my birth map, you do not have permission to do this in the event that this kind of scenario falls out." And both of us found that really empowering because we were able to communicate our personal need in that scenario. I also had a number of a friend who was prepared to come in and feed the baby for me. And I had explicitly said, I want her to feed the baby directly because the WHO guidelines suggest that that's the next best scenario if the mother's milk can't be given to the baby. If she's unable to do that, then she will provide milk that can be finger fed to the baby. So we went through all these possibilities before we got to bottles of formula, that there were options. But because the formula bottle is the standard option, if you don't document those other options, they're not going to come up. So the midwife in the end sort of went, "Wow, that's actually really good. Thank you for that. I know that's not going to happen, but it's given me food for thought as well." So I've had a lot of midwives telling me that they love the concept of the birth map because they take for granted, they know how it works. They know how the policies work in the hospital, and it's like riding a bicycle. They're not consciously thinking of each step. Whereas the mother who's coming into it for the first time, she actually needs to know each step. It's like I was cooking with my daughter. She's 12 years old, and she was following a recipe that I'd written down in my personal recipe book, which was really just a list of ingredients because I know that recipe so well that I actually hadn't put any instructions with it. And so she's trying to follow this recipe, and I didn't realise what she was doing. And then afterwards, I said to her, "Didn't you cream the butter and the sugar?" And she said, "What does that even mean, Mum? You didn't write that down." So we rewrote the recipe together with every tiny step. And I explained to her what each step actually meant because there's so much assumed knowledge when it comes to cooking. And it's the same with birthing. The care provider has so much assumed knowledge that they know, particularly that first birth, when she doesn't. I've had women who didn't even realise there was going to be a placenta or that there was going to be bleeding after the birth because you don't think about these things. No. You know, that woman is not stupid. She just hasn't been made aware of something. And so we need to break it down into those little steps and without it being patronising. That's the really key part.
It's almost like once you become aware of all these things, would you even choose to get pregnant in the first place? Interesting. Who would have thought? But it's really powerful, Mike, because like any other surgical procedure you'd be having, like any major body kind of work, you'd go through all these steps. And the thing is, like, birth is even more complex than any of those, and all the different things that can happen. And it's almost been, because it's like birth is so complex. I don't know, maybe women are so stupid or something, that it's all just being thrown under the carpet. Whereas what you've done is shine a light on, you know, like right across it. I mean, what you talked about in your personal example there, I mean, I didn't even know that was a possible consequence. I wouldn't have known that that could happen. I'm feeling like a little dumb here. Like, I wouldn't even have known. And of course I would have want my baby breastfed, and I wouldn't, I'm feeling like power and almost like not outrage, but like kind of outrage. Like, I want to protect my baby, you know, and myself, you know, through all of that. And you give women that power back to be the mother, to be the protector, to be the mother figure. And that comes through you and your book and your work. No, this is an incredibly liberating experience that you're giving women, you know, connecting them to knowledge, connecting them to inner power. If there's women out there who want to learn how to give this to women, you know, within, you know, the maternity care kind of circle, like, can they come and train with you? What do they learn? And tell me.
Yeah, I do offer birth cartography training. Birth cartography is my trademark, a cartographer being a map maker. So I offer an intensive course, and periodically I offer the retreats which happen on my place. We camp out under the stars and share meals together, and it's, you know, quite an awesome experience. And I have a friend who does the catering. She's a professional caterer, and she cooks using all locally resourced foods. It's a nurturing of the soul, as well as preparing ourselves to nurture other people. So yeah, it's a limited space thing because it's at my home, but it's definitely a lot of fun if you can come along. But the intensives, I narrow it down to one full-on day, and I can take that around the country to where it needs to happen. And the idea being that the midwives, doulas, obstetricians can come along and find out exactly what the process looks like, so that they can then encourage their clients, their customers, their consumers to take on this process, and provide them with a copy of the book as part of their package, so that working together to put the mum in the driver's seat and say, you're worth it. You are totally worth it. And we are going to honour this process and acknowledge exactly what this change that you're going through is. It's not just about making some decisions about, do you want an epidural or not? There's so much more to it than that. It's not a smorgasbord. It's a journey. So
this is fantastic. Look, everyone who's listening right now, we'll be putting links to Catherine's website and books and everything in the content that comes with this video. And I guess that if you are out there and you're thinking, wow, my community would really benefit from this kind of like birth map knowledge, I guess you can get in contact with Catherine via her website and invite her to where you are to do the training or to share her knowledge with you. And we'll definitely be having you back, Catherine, in, you know, the future to come and walk us through the whole process of how we create our birth map with you. Before we go, it's been a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful journey, and I use that word in its full kind of meaning with you today as you've walked us through this. And I guess, you know, I'll as like an ending question, I'll just ask you, like, because I kind of get the feeling that this is what you're working towards and what you're wanting to release in people. But, you know, how can birth be a celebration for people? How can we celebrate birth? Because like the birth map isn't, you know, the map is not the territory. Like the whole point, like, isn't to be in our heads. Like we had this conversation with Maha in the series, Maha Al Musa, about how birth, we don't do it in our heads, we do it in our bodies. So whereas the map can feel like very much like a head process, but it's not that at all. Like, because I think you asked when you first saw birth, like right at the start of our conversation together, where's the celebration? So what is a celebratory birth look like? How can we bring it on for ourselves?
A celebratory birth is one where a woman comes through feeling respected, and she's feeling positive and empowered by that experience. It's not the type of birth that becomes what we celebrate. It's the feeling around that birth. If that mother feels awesome and in control, in as much as you can be in control of the actual birth, if she felt respected through that process, she comes out the other side and she is roaring. She's going, yeah, I can do anything. And we can celebrate the emergence of her as a mother, the birth of her as a new person. And that celebration is something that, as a society, we are existing in an area of fear or tolerance at best when it comes to birth. We process women, We treat them all in a one-size-fits-all process. We don't trust them to be able to do it on their own. They have to have a medicalised experience in order for it to be considered proper and right. And there's no fanfare, there's no honour through that process. It's definitely all in the head, which is why the birth map addresses that's where society is. This is the climate that we have to work in. So we need to have a way that we can communicate with a society that's in that space. And in doing that, we open up the avenue to have that celebratory space, because we've now moved ourselves away from fear and tolerance into the ability to be able to embrace that experience in its fullness and go, wow, I can confidently go into my heart and do it the Maha way, which is absolutely beautiful, and go and dance your way through that birth, and then dance your way through parenting, embracing the child that you have created, falling in love with your partner even more deeply as you've experienced this amazing journey together, rather than just being processed by a system that doesn't acknowledge the importance of this change to a couple.
Look, that's phenomenal. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing everything here today. I've really loved it, and thank you everyone for joining us, and come back for the next Learning to Birth webinar, and we'll be having Catherine back soon, so it's fantastic. Thank you, and bye-bye everyone. Okay.